You never expect your own child to make you feel like a stranger. Especially not inside the home you built. My name is Della Green, I'm 72 years old, and after my husband passed, I moved in with my son, thinking family would be my comfort. But over time the warmth faded. My name was no longer on the bills, my chair in the dining room quietly disappeared, and my voice stopped mattering. They started calling me Mom, only when they needed something. A meal, a favor, a cleaned-up mess. One day my son's wife left a note on the counter that said, "Please dust the guest room before 3. That's when I realized something. They didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as help. But I wasn't about to argue. I just decided to let the cameras tell the truth. When my husband passed, the silence in the house became unbearable. Every sound, every creak in the floor, every clock tick, seemed to echo his absence. Mark, my only son, had insisted I move in with him. "Mom, it'll be good for you," he said. "You shouldn't be alone." His wife, Tanya, nodded along with that polite smile she always wore. I didn't want to intrude, but the thought of another winter in that empty house made my chest feel tight. So I packed my memories into a few boxes. Photo albums, my husband's old books, a few dishes that had meaning, and I left behind the home we built together. When I first arrived, it felt comforting. Their house was lively, filled with the sound of their 2 kids laughing, the smell of dinner cooking, the television humming softly in the evenings. I slept in the guest room, which Tanya had made up with fresh sheets and lavender-scented candles. I remember thinking, she's trying, she's being kind. I told myself this was a new chapter. I wasn't replacing my old life. I was simply finding my place in theirs. For the first few weeks, everything felt fine. I helped around the kitchen, picked the kids up from school sometimes, and made my famous chicken pot pie on Sundays. Tanya always said she loved it, and Mark would smile, saying it reminded him of home. That word, home, meant something different to me than it did to them. But I didn't say that out loud. I just smiled and took comfort in the routine. Then, slowly, things began to change. Little things at first. The kids stopped coming to me for bedtime stories. Tanya started planning dinners without asking if I'd be home. My laundry was moved to a smaller basket by the back door. It was subtle, quiet shifts that were easy to overlook if you weren't paying attention. But I noticed, and though I didn't say a word, a small ache started forming somewhere deep inside me. Strange how fast people get used to convenience. One morning, Tanya left early for work and called out, "Mom, can you throw in a load of towels for me?" I didn't mind. Felt good to be useful. But the next day it was dishes. The day after that, vacuuming. And soon, without anyone saying it out loud, it became understood that I would do it all. The house was big, and Tanya worked long hours, so I tried to convince myself that helping out was only fair. That's what family did. Mark would come home tired, loosening his tie, giving me a distracted kiss on the cheek before disappearing into his office. Sometimes I'd wait up just to talk to him, but he'd say, "Not now, Mom. I'm exhausted." So I'd sit in the living room, the same one that used to feel warm and alive, and listen to the hum of the dishwasher. My own quiet company. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself keeping the house spotless. Tanya's friends started visiting more often, and they'd comment on how beautiful the place looked. She'd smile and say, "Oh, it's been such a blessing having Mom here to help around." That word, help, stung more than I expected. Not because of what she said, but because of what she didn't. One afternoon I overheard her on the phone with someone. Her mother, I think. She was laughing, her voice light and easy. "Oh, she's fine," Tanya said. "Basically keeps the place running for us. It's like having a live-in housekeeper." Housekeeper. That word sat heavy in my chest. I stood in the hallway for a long time after she said it, holding a basket of clean laundry in my arms. I remember staring at one of Mark's shirts, neatly folded, and wondering when I stopped being his mother and became just another part of their routine. I wanted to confront her. Oh, I did, but something stopped me. Maybe it was pride. Maybe fear. Or maybe it was that tiny part of me that still hoped she didn't mean it the way it sounded. I told myself it was just a joke, just a slip of the tongue. I wanted to believe that. That night I made dinner. Pot roast the way Mark liked it. I set the table for 4, lit the candles and waited. When they came in, the kids ran to the TV. Mark headed straight to his laptop, and Tanya gave the food a glance before saying, "Thanks, Mom. We already grabbed something on the way home." I just stood there for a second, staring at the untouched plates. The candles flickered, catching the edges of the family photo hanging on the wall. Mark, Tanya, the kids and me. Only in that picture I looked happy. I remember thinking that the woman in that frame didn't exist anymore. Later that week, Tanya asked me if I could help out with some ironing before their guests arrived. Her tone was polite, but there was something sharp underneath it. I wanted to tell her no. I wanted to remind her that I was 72 years old, not their maid. But the words didn't come. Instead, I nodded and said, "Of course." After the guests left that night, I heard her thanking Mark for keeping Mom busy. She laughed again, and this time he laughed too. My son. The same boy who used to bring me flowers from the backyard and say, "You're the best mom in the world." I sat in my room that night, unable to sleep. I could hear the dishwasher running, the muffled sound of the TV in the living room, and the faint hum of Tanya's voice. The house didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a place I lived in but didn't belong to. The next morning, I found a note on the counter in Tanya's handwriting. "Mom, could you please dust the guest room before 3? Thanks." There was a little smiley face at the end, as if that softened it. I stood there reading it over and over. My hands were steady, but something inside me wasn't. That was the moment it all changed. Not because I felt anger, I didn't. I just felt done. I did dust that room, but I did it differently. Paid attention. I noticed the way the light hit the corners, the way the furniture creaked, the way everything in that house had become something I maintained but didn't own. I started seeing it all clearly for the first time. I realized then that silence can be powerful. Can be a shield or it can be a tool. People underestimate it. They think silence means surrender. But in truth, silence gives you time to see, to think, to plan. That day, I finished my chores like I always did. But that night, as I folded laundry and watched the shadows move across the floor, I decided something quietly. Something I didn't tell a soul. I wasn't going to argue, I wasn't going to shout, and I wasn't going to beg for respect. I was going to let their actions tell the story themselves. What they didn't know, what they couldn't possibly imagine, was that their house, the one they thought they controlled, was about to become the witness to it all. Because while they saw me as invisible, I was learning just how much power there is in being unseen. And that's where everything started to shift, from quiet acceptance to quiet awakening. It's strange how quickly a house full of people can start to feel like an empty one. There were voices, footsteps, laughter, even the sound of doors closing, but none of it felt like it belonged to me anymore. Most days I'd wake up before everyone else, just out of habit. Old people do that, our bodies still run on the rhythms of a life long gone. I'd make coffee, set out cups, sometimes even cook breakfast, though nobody ever asked me to. First they'd thank me. Then they just stopped noticing. Mark would grab his mug, half listening to something on his phone, and Tanya would rush through the kitchen, heels clicking, talking about some meeting or another. The kids would mumble a quick "morning, Grandma" on their way out the door, backpacks bouncing behind them. By the time the house quieted down, I'd be left standing there with my cup, the smell of burnt toast still hanging in the air. That silence after they left, that was the hardest part. It wasn't peaceful like the kind of quiet my husband and I used to share on Sunday mornings. It was heavy, hollow, like the house itself was holding its breath. I'd fill the hours the only way I knew how, cleaning, folding, cooking, anything that gave my hands purpose. I told myself it helped, that I was still part of the household in some way. But the truth was, I didn't have anywhere else to go. I had given up my own home to move here. My things were packed into boxes in their garage. Even my favorite chair, the one my husband used to sit in, was tucked away under a tarp. Out of sight just like me. Lunches came and went without a word. Sometimes Tanya worked from home, taking her calls from the dining room table. I'd keep quiet, dusting the shelves or ironing clothes in the next room. She never acknowledged me, never said thank you. It was like I'd become a sound in the background, part of the furniture, part of the hum of daily life. But what stung most wasn't the work. It was the distance. Conversations that used to include me, plans for the weekend, family news, even little things like what to have for dinner, were now whispered or typed out on phones. If I asked what they were talking about, Tanya would smile politely and say, "Oh, it's nothing, Mom." But it was never nothing. It was always something I wasn't supposed to hear. Even at dinner, the silence followed me. I'd cook something nice, something homemade. Meatloaf, mashed potatoes, cornbread, because I thought maybe if I kept bringing warmth into the house, it would come back to me somehow. But it didn't. They'd eat while scrolling through their phones, nodding occasionally, their voices full of work talk or neighborhood gossip. The kind of talk that fills the air without saying anything real. Sometimes Mark would glance up and ask, "You okay, Mom?" And I'd smile, the same smile I'd given him since he was a boy. "I'm fine, sweetheart." But we both knew that wasn't true. One evening after dinner, I was clearing the plates while they sat in the living room watching TV. I wasn't really listening, until I heard my name. Tanya's voice, sharp and casual all at once. "She saves us a fortune, you know," she said, laughing. Mark chuckled softly. "What do you mean?" "Well," she continued, "a cleaner, a cook, a babysitter, if we had to pay for all that, we'd be broke." I froze, a plate still in my hand. My first instinct was to think I'd misheard her. But then she laughed again. It wasn't cruel exactly, just careless. The kind of laugh people use when they forget someone's feelings exist. Mark didn't say anything for a moment. Then I heard him say, "Yeah, I guess you're right." That was it. Just those words. And something inside me shifted. I finished the dishes quietly, each plate feeling heavier than the last. When I was done, I walked to my room and closed the door softly behind me. I sat down at my sewing table, the same one I'd had for years, and stared at the half-finished hem of a curtain I'd been mending for Tanya. The lamp cast a small, warm circle of light, and right beside it sat a framed photo of Mark as a child. He was maybe 8 years old in that picture, grinning wide, missing his front tooth. My husband had his arm around us both, his smile steady and proud. I reached out and touched the glass. I could still remember the day that picture was taken. It was a summer picnic at the lake. Mark had caught his first fish, and he ran all the way up the hill to show his dad. His little hands were shaking from excitement. His father had ruffled his hair and said, "That's my boy." And I'd taken that picture right there, capturing a moment of pure joy, pure love. Now, years later, that boy lived under the same roof as me, but I hardly knew him anymore. His voice had changed. His laughter had softened into something distant. I used to be his world. Now I was just someone who kept it running smoothly. It hit me then that love without respect turns into something else. Turns into servitude. And servitude, no matter how quiet, eats away at your soul. I sat there for a long time, the sound of the TV faint through the walls. They were laughing at something, a show, a joke, who knows. It didn't matter. I realized that night that I could scream, and no one would come running. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't hear me anymore. So I stopped trying to be heard. I started to listen instead. I listened to how they talked to each other. How Tanya always used that clipped tone when she spoke to me, but soft laughter when she spoke to friends. I noticed how Mark avoided eye contact whenever I brought up his father's name. I noticed how they kept track of everything. Groceries, bills, chores, but never gratitude. And in those quiet moments when the house fell asleep, I'd walk through the rooms, turning off the lights they forgot, folding the blankets they left behind. I started seeing things clearly, not just what they did, but why. I began to understand the small ways people justify cruelty to themselves. I didn't hate them. I really didn't. I pitied them because they'd forgotten what family means. They'd turned love into a transaction. But that realization didn't break me, it woke me up. One night, after everyone had gone to bed, I sat back down at my sewing table. I opened the drawer where I kept my husband's old notebook, The one where he used to write reminders, grocery lists, even love notes. I flipped through it and found an old receipt for a home insurance policy. In his handwriting, faint and faded, he'd written a small note in the margin. Always document everything. I don't know why, but that sentence stayed with me. I read it again and again, like a whisper from the past. And that's when it came to me, quietly, naturally, like the way light seeps into a dark room. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to fight. All I needed was the truth, and a way to show it. That night, for the first time in a long while, I slept soundly. My heart was still heavy, but it wasn't helpless anymore. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do yet. But I knew this much. They had mistaken my silence for weakness. They had no idea that silence, when used right, can be the strongest sound in the world. And that was the beginning of my plan. Not a loud one, not a vengeful one, but a quiet, steady one. One that would let the truth unfold on its own. Because sometimes the best way to be heard is to stop talking altogether. I remember the day I bought the cameras. It was a Wednesday, quiet, gray, and cool, the kind of day where the world feels half asleep. I told Mark and Tanya I was going to the pharmacy, but I took a detour downtown instead. The electronics store wasn't big, but it was bright. Too bright, with rows of little plastic boxes stacked neatly on shelves. I wandered the aisles until I found the security section, and there they were. 2 small home cameras, no bigger than my palm. I stood there for a moment, staring at the packaging. For safety, the label said. I almost smiled. Safety, that was exactly the word I needed. I took 2 boxes to the counter, handed over the cash, and walked out feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Control. When I got home, I placed the bags on the counter like they were nothing important. Just another errand. No one noticed. Mark was on his laptop, and Tanya was scrolling through her phone, half listening to a podcast. The kids were in their rooms, their laughter muffled behind closed doors. That night, after everyone went to bed, I opened the boxes. The cameras were sleek, black, and quiet like me. Setting them up wasn't as hard as I thought it would be. One went on the bookshelf in the living room, nestled between photo frames and a vase. The other I placed on the counter near the kitchen, angled toward the dining room. From there they could see everything, the way Tanya spoke to me, the way Mark brushed off my words, even the way they looked at me. I didn't tell anyone about them. I didn't have to. They were small enough to blend in, invisible to eyes that only saw what they wanted. The next morning, life went on as usual. Tanya left her coffee mug on the table without a word. Mark rushed out the door, saying he'd be late. I tidied up just like always. Only this time, as I wiped the counter, I felt different. I wasn't just cleaning anymore. I was watching, listening. At first, I told myself I was overreacting. That maybe this was silly, that recording my own family was crossing a line. But then, little by little, the cameras began to confirm everything I had felt but tried to ignore. The first recording I watched was from that same morning. Tanya came into the kitchen, looking annoyed because the coffee maker was empty. She sighed and said, "Mom, you really should make another pot when it runs out. You're the only one home most of the day." Her tone was polite on the surface, but sharp underneath, like a knife wrapped in lace. I remember sitting there in my room watching the video and feeling something click inside me. It wasn't anger. It was clarity. I finally saw my life the way an outsider would. Not through the lens of guilt or obligation, but through plain truth. Over the next few weeks, the recordings stacked up. Tanya telling me to make myself useful, while she lounged on the couch. Mark brushing off my questions about the bills with, "Don't worry about it, Mom, it's under control." The sound of my own voice, calm, patient, small, echoing through those clips made me realize how quiet I had become. I wasn't living. I was existing quietly between their sentences. Sometimes, after everyone went to bed, I'd pour myself a cup of tea and review the footage. I'd label each file carefully on my old laptop. Day 3, kitchen, day 5, living room, Sunday after dinner. My hands trembled at first, but soon it became routine, like journaling. Except this journal spoke for itself. What struck me most wasn't the cruelty. It was the casualness. They didn't even think about how they spoke to me. It was as if they'd erased the memory of who I used to be. Tanya treated me like hired help. Mark treated me like an inconvenience he couldn't quite admit to having. And I just moved through the rooms like a ghost, keeping their lives in order. One night, I recorded something that sealed my resolve. I'd made dinner, a roast with vegetables, one of Mark's favorites. He walked in late, loosened his tie, and looked at the table without even glancing at me. "We already grabbed takeout," he said. Tanya laughed softly, scrolling through her phone. "You really don't have to keep cooking like this, Mom," she added. "It's just too much sometimes." Too much. I watched that clip 3 times later that night. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I wanted to remember exactly how it felt. That strange emptiness, that polite dismissal. I think that's when my silence started to change. It wasn't a silence of sadness anymore. It was one of preparation. The house itself became part of it. Every sound, every word felt heavier now. When Tanya dropped her shoes by the door, when Mark called out from the hall, when the kids argued upstairs, the walls held all of it. The cameras became my witnesses, quiet and patient. Then something unexpected happened. Tanya started complaining to her friends about me on speakerphone. I didn't mean to overhear, but she never closed the door. She told someone, "It's like living with an employee you can't fire." She laughed, that same hollow laugh that had become her signature. I mean, she's not mean or anything, but she's just there. You know, that word there. That's what I had become. Not loved, not valued, not respected. Just there. That night, I sat in the dark, the hum of the refrigerator filling the kitchen. I thought about my husband, about how he used to tell me, "You're the heart of this family, Della." I wondered what he'd think if he saw how things had turned out. For a long time I blamed myself. Maybe I'd made Mark too comfortable, too dependent. Maybe I'd forgiven him too easily when he was young. But then I realized, kindness isn't weakness. It's just that some people mistake one for the other. By the 3rd week, I had hours of recordings. Little pieces of proof. Moments that might seem small to anyone else but told the whole story when placed side by side. Tanya's sharp tone, Mark's silence, the way they left me out of every decision. It was all there. I didn't know what I'd do with them yet. But I knew this. If the time ever came when they tried to twist things, when they tried to make me the problem, I'd have the truth. Not the emotional kind, but the kind that doesn't flinch under scrutiny. One evening, Mark came home early and found me sitting in the living room. He smiled faintly and asked, "You okay, Mom? You've been quiet lately." I looked at him for a moment, studying his face. There was still a trace of that boy I'd raised. The one who used to hug me before bed, who'd call me Mama instead of Mom. I smiled and said, "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." He nodded, satisfied, and went upstairs. As soon as his footsteps faded, I looked up at the little black lens on the bookshelf. The camera's red light blinked once, steady and calm. I whispered softly, "I'm tired of pretending." In the following days, I added one more camera, near the hallway. I told Tanya it was for security, since I'd seen a report about break-ins on the news. She agreed easily, even thanked me for thinking of it. She had no idea it would be watching her too. I didn't feel guilty about it. Not anymore. You can't call it betrayal when it's the only way to defend yourself. Each passing day made me stronger in my quiet way. I still cooked, cleaned, smiled, played my part. But behind every nod and every "sure, dear," I had the truth tucked safely away on a memory card. Sometimes I'd sit on the porch at night, the house quiet behind me, and look up at the stars. I'd think about how many years I'd spent believing that keeping peace was the same as being respected. I'd been wrong. Real peace isn't something you beg for. It's something you claim when you finally stop accepting less than you deserve. And deep down, I knew the time would come, the moment when all this quiet documentation would matter. I didn't know when or how, but I could feel it building like the pause before a storm. I wasn't waiting for revenge. I was waiting for truth. And when truth shows up, it doesn't need to shout. Just needs to be seen. It was one of those bright, early summer mornings where the air felt heavier than it should have. The kind of day that looks calm on the outside but carries tension underneath. I was out front, trimming the rose bushes that lined the walkway. They'd been my husband's pride, those roses, red as wine, stubborn as time. Every spring I still cared for them the way he did. It gave me something steady to hold on to. Tanya came out onto the porch, her phone in one hand, that clipped tone already in her voice. "Mom, did you forget to take the trash cans out again?" she called, loud enough for the neighbors to hear. I didn't even look up. "They're out," I said quietly, pointing to the curb. She sighed, the kind of sigh that sounds more like an announcement than frustration. "Well, maybe next time, check before I have to remind you. We're trying to keep the place looking decent, you know." There was laughter from across the street. One of the neighbors, maybe two. I glanced up just long enough to see Mrs. Hines, the woman with the manicured lawn and sharper tongue, smirking from her driveway. Tanya didn't notice. Or maybe she did, and that's why she said what came next. "You'd think after living here rent-free, the least you could do is keep up appearances. You're not the maid, Mom, but you sure act like one sometimes." The words hit the air like glass shattering. Sharp, echoing, impossible to ignore. I froze, pruning shears still in my hand. My heart didn't race, and my face didn't flush. Just stop. There's a certain kind of stillness that comes when someone crosses a line so completely that emotion can't reach you yet. The sound of the neighbor's doorbell chime cut through the silence. I didn't know it at the time, but that chime meant everything was being recorded. Tanya must have seen my face, because she tried to laugh it off. "Oh, come on, Mom. Don't look like that. I was just joking." But it wasn't a joke. And she knew it. I turned and went inside without saying a word. The rest of the day passed in slow motion. The house was quiet, but not in the usual way. Even the air felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. I moved through the rooms, folding laundry, washing dishes, dusting the shelves, each motion automatic, the same ones I'd done 1,000 times before. But now, every sound, every step echoed with that word. That night I didn't eat dinner with them. I said I wasn't hungry and went to my room. I sat on the edge of my bed, looking at the faint glow from the hallway light leaking under the door. I thought about my husband. I could almost hear his voice in the quiet, the way he used to tell me, "You don't have to fight to be right, Dell. Just stand in truth. It'll speak when it's time." I whispered his name and felt a tear slip down my cheek. It wasn't sadness this time. It was clarity. 2 days later, the incident spread through the neighborhood. Someone from down the block, I never found out who, had posted the doorbell footage to a community page. "Caught on camera. Daughter humiliates her elderly mother." That's what the caption said. It wasn't long before Tanya saw it. I could tell by the way she came storming into the kitchen, her phone gripped tight in her hand. "Did you know about this?" she demanded. I was stirring tea at the counter. I didn't answer. "Mom, answer me." I looked up at her, calm and steady. "No," I said softly. "But I know what happened." She stared at me for a long moment, eyes wide with something between anger and fear. Then she turned and stormed off, muttering, "Unbelievable." Mark didn't say much, but I could feel his unease. He moved slower around me, like he wasn't sure what to say or how to act. For the first time in months, I saw shame flicker in his eyes when he looked at me. But it didn't last. Shame rarely does when pride takes over. That night, when they went to bed, I opened my laptop and scrolled through the folders of recordings I'd kept. Weeks of quiet truth. Clips labeled neatly. Kitchen, May 10th. Living room, May 22nd. Dinner, June 2nd. I clicked one at random. There was Tanya standing in the doorway, telling me to make myself useful. Then another, Mark, saying he was too busy to help when I asked him to lift a box. Another, Tanya's voice laughing. "She likes it. Keeps her busy." The words played back like an old radio, the kind you can't quite turn off. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I just watched, one clip after another, until the night turned to morning. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called my late husband's lawyer. His name was Robert Ellis. A kind, patient man who had known my husband since before Mark was born. His voice was gentle when he answered, though I could hear the years in it. Della. My goodness, it's been too long. It has, I said quietly. I need your help. He didn't rush me. Just listened as I explained slowly and clearly everything that had happened. The chores, the neglect, the public humiliation. I told him about the recordings, the evidence, even the doorbell footage that had made its way online. There was a long silence on the other end. Then he said, "You did the right thing documenting it, Della. I wish you hadn't had to, but you did." We met the next day at his office. I brought a small flash drive in a plain envelope. He plugged it in and watched the clips in silence, his jaw tightening slightly with each passing minute. When it was over, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands. "This isn't just mistreatment," he said finally. "It's neglect, financial and emotional. You still have a legal share of that home, don't you?" "Yes," I said. "Half of it." He nodded. "Then we're going to make sure it's protected. I'll file a petition for guardianship over your share. You'll have authority over how the property is managed and who can make financial decisions related to it." His words were calm, matter-of-fact, but I felt something stirring deep inside me, something like relief or maybe justice. I'd been quiet for so long that even hearing someone else defend me felt powerful. Over the next few weeks, Robert handled everything. I stayed home, keeping to my usual routines. Cooking, cleaning, pretending everything was normal. But underneath that calm surface, things were changing. Papers were being filed. Dates were being set. And the truth, recorded quietly in those little black cameras, was now moving through the proper channels. Then came the letter. Official looking, with my name and Mark's listed side by side. I opened it slowly at the kitchen table. The words were simple. Notice of guardianship petition filed. When Mark read it later that evening, his face drained of color. "What is this?" he said, his voice low but trembling. "It's just paperwork," I said softly. "Something Robert helped me with." Tanya snatched the letter from his hand, scanning it quickly. "You went to a lawyer. Over what?" "This is ridiculous." I met her eyes. "Over the truth," I said. She laughed bitterly. "You're overreacting. This is family business, not a courtroom matter." I nodded slowly. "Then you should have treated it like family business." Mark didn't speak. He just stood there, looking at me like he was seeing me for the first time. Not as a burden, not as background, but as someone who wasn't going to disappear quietly anymore. That night I went to bed early. For the first time in months I slept deeply. The next morning the world went on as usual. But something had shifted. I didn't move through the house like a shadow anymore. I walked with purpose. The same home that had felt like a cage now felt like a place of reckoning. Not loud or violent, but steady and deliberate. And as the sun poured through the windows, lighting up the corners of the living room, I glanced at the camera on the shelf and whispered, "It's almost time." Because storms don't always come with thunder. Sometimes they arrive in silence, and they change everything when they do. The day the notice arrived, the house was wrapped in that uneasy stillness that comes right before an argument, the kind where everyone's waiting for someone else to speak first. I was sitting at the kitchen table, sipping tea, when I heard the front door swing open. Mark's footsteps came quick and heavy down the hallway. He didn't even say hello. The papers were crumpled in his fist when he stormed into the kitchen. Tanya followed close behind, her voice sharp with anger before I even looked up. "What is this, Mom?" she snapped, holding up the notice like it was a personal insult. "You filed legal action against us. Against your own family." I set my cup down quietly. "I didn't file anything against you," I said softly. "I filed to protect myself." "That's different." Mark's voice trembled, not with fear but disbelief. "You can't just do this. You're my mother. You're making us look terrible in front of everyone." I looked at him for a long moment. "You did that all by yourself, sweetheart." That stopped him. Just for a second. Long enough for Tanya to fill the silence. "This is ridiculous," she said, her tone rising. "You're being manipulated. Someone must have convinced you to do this. That old lawyer of your husband's probably. He's taking advantage of you. You're not thinking clearly." Her words were sharp, but underneath them was something else, fear. It was in the way her voice wavered at the edges, in the way she gripped those papers like she was holding onto the last piece of control she had left. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I'd spent too many months explaining things to people who didn't want to understand. Instead, I reached for the small black tablet on the table beside me, the one connected to the cameras. I tapped the screen, found the clip I was looking for, and pressed play. The kitchen filled with sound, Tanya's voice clear as day. "Mom, make sure you clean the guest bathroom before everyone gets here. And try not to talk too much during dinner, okay? We want it to feel polished." The recording ended there. For a moment no one spoke. Mark's shoulders slumped. He looked down at the table like he couldn't quite face what he'd just heard. Tanya, though, she tried to hold her ground. "That's out of context," she said quickly, her voice cracking. "You can't just..." But I didn't let her finish. "That's enough," I said quietly. "I don't need to explain it. The truth doesn't need context when it's spoken plainly." The room went still again. Even the clock on the wall seemed to hesitate before ticking forward. Mark finally looked up at me, his face pale. "Mom, we never meant to hurt you. You know that, right? We were just trying to manage everything. Things got complicated." I nodded slowly. "Complicated doesn't mean cruel." His eyes glistened a little then, but he said nothing. Tanya, though, wasn't ready to let go. "You've twisted everything," she said, her voice tight with anger. "You're acting like some victim when all you've done is make things harder for us. We took you in. We gave you a place to stay." I felt my heart tighten at that, not because of the words themselves, but because of how easily they came out of her mouth. As if kindness had been charity, not love. "I didn't ask you to take me in," I said softly. "You offered. And when I came here I thought I was coming home. But you turned it into something else. Something I don't even recognize." I stood up slowly, my hands steady on the edge of the table. My voice stayed calm, though every word carried the weight of months I'd spent being unseen. "I spent my life taking care of this family," I said. "I cooked, I cleaned, I worked double shifts to keep the lights on when your father was sick. I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because that's what love looks like when it's real. But what you gave me in return wasn't love. It was convenience." Mark opened his mouth to say something, but I held up a hand. "Don't," I whispered. "Just listen." The quiet that followed wasn't peaceful. It was raw, the kind that makes people see themselves clearly for the first time. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's accountability." The word hung in the air like smoke, slow, thick, impossible to ignore. Tanya crossed her arms, her jaw tight, but I could see her eyes flicker with something like shame. Mark just sank into the chair across from me. His hands pressed together, staring at the table as if it could offer answers. After a long silence, he spoke. His voice low, almost boyish. "I didn't realize how bad it had gotten," he said. "I just thought you were fine. You never complained." I smiled sadly. "That's the problem, sweetheart. You stopped noticing because I stopped expecting you to." For a moment he looked like he might cry. Tanya turned away, pretending to check her phone, though I could see her hand trembling slightly. "I didn't take pleasure in any of it. That's not who I am." But there was a certain peace in seeing truth finally laid bare. Not screamed, not forced, just spoken aloud and left to stand on its own. When the lawyer's letter came a few weeks later confirming the guardianship order, I didn't gloat. I just folded it neatly and placed it in my drawer. Life carried on, the kids still went to school, the dishes still got done, and the world outside kept spinning. But the energy inside the house had shifted. The silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It was space I'd earned back. Mark became quieter around me, more careful with his words. Sometimes he'd stop by the kitchen and ask, "You need help with that, Mom?" I'd smile and say, "No, I've got it." But the effort mattered. I could see he was trying. Tanya, on the other hand, avoided me. I'd catch her watching me sometimes, as if she was waiting for me to scold her or lecture her. But I never did. I didn't need to. She already knew. Every now and then, when the house was quiet, I'd replay that one moment, not out of spite but as a reminder. The sound of my own voice saying, "This isn't revenge. It's accountability." It helped me remember that strength doesn't always come with raised voices or sharp words. Sometimes it's just about staying calm enough to let the truth echo on its own. One afternoon, Mark came into my room while I was folding laundry. He hesitated at the door, like he wasn't sure if he was allowed in. "Mom," he said, "Tanya's been having a hard time with everything." I looked up and nodded. "I know. She didn't mean." "Mark," I interrupted gently, "I'm not angry. But forgiveness doesn't mean pretending it didn't happen." He nodded slowly. "I understand." And I think for the first time in a long time he actually did. After he left, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around the room, the same room I'd once thought of as a corner of someone else's home. Now it felt like mine again. The walls no longer pressed in. The air no longer felt borrowed. Sometimes at night, I'd hear the faint hum of the camera in the living room. Still there, still recording, even though I didn't really need it anymore. I never turned it off. Not because I wanted to catch them doing something wrong, but because it reminded me of what I'd learned. That truth, once seen, doesn't go back to hiding. I had spent so much of my life keeping peace, smoothing things over, swallowing my hurt, staying small so others could feel big. But standing there that day, facing my own son and the woman who once called me the maid, I realized something simple and freeing. Sometimes dignity isn't taken. It's given away, piece by piece, until you finally decide to take it back. And that's exactly what I'd done. Not by shouting, not by punishing, but by standing still and letting the truth do what truth always does: uncover, reveal, and restore. That night, when the house went quiet and I turned off the lights, I looked out the window into the dark. For the first time in months, I saw my own reflection not as someone faded or forgotten, but as someone whole again. I whispered softly to myself, "It's over now." And though I said it barely above a breath, the peace that followed felt louder than anything else. It's been almost a year now since I packed the last of my boxes and closed the door to Mark's house for the final time. The air that morning was still and pale, the kind that promises a new beginning but doesn't announce it loudly. I remember standing on the porch with my small suitcase beside me, looking back only once. The house looked smaller than I remembered, quieter too. Maybe it was never the place that hurt me, just the people who forgot what a home should mean. I took a deep breath, exhaled slowly, and stepped forward. The cottage I found wasn't fancy. It sat on a quiet street lined with oak trees, their branches dipping low like they were whispering secrets to anyone who cared to listen. The roof sagged a little in the middle, and the paint on the porch railing was chipped. But it was mine. Oh, mine. I bought it with a portion of the sale proceeds from the old house. The same house that had once felt like a prison. Felt strange, in the best way, to use that very money to build something that finally felt like freedom. The first week there, I didn't rush to unpack. I just opened all the windows and let the sunlight pour in. The place smelled of wood, dust, and faint lavender, the kind of scent that clings to old furniture but feels comforting somehow. I'd sit by the window in the mornings with a cup of coffee, listening to the birds, and think about how quiet can sound so different depending on where you are. In that house, silence used to mean absence. Here it meant peace. I filled the little rooms slowly, carefully, with things that made me feel alive again. Books, framed photos, the old record player my husband used to tinker with in the garage. I'd forgotten how warm vinyl sounds when the needle settles into place. That soft crackle before the first note. On some mornings, I'd play his favorite record, one of those slow jazz pieces that used to float through our kitchen on Sunday afternoons. And for a while it felt like he was right there again, smiling from across the table. I planted a small garden behind the cottage. Nothing fancy, just herbs, daisies, and a few rose bushes. I told myself they were for him, but truthfully they were for me too. It felt good to watch something grow again, something that didn't ask for permission or approval, just sunlight and care. People in the neighborhood were kind, in that easy small-town way. They'd wave from across the street, bring over pie, or stop by to ask about the flowers. It had been so long since someone looked at me and saw more than a burden or a background character in their own lives. One afternoon, while I was at the local community center helping sort through donations, a woman named Carol approached me. She was around my age, maybe a little younger, with tired eyes that still carried kindness. She said she'd seen me on a local news piece. They'd covered my story briefly after the guardianship filing became public record. I didn't expect it to reach anyone beyond that neighborhood, but apparently it had. She told me her daughter had done something similar. Not the cameras or the legal part, but the quiet cruelty that hides behind politeness. She said, "I wish I'd known what to do sooner. I just didn't know how to stand up for myself." Her words stayed with me. That night, while washing dishes, I thought about how many people must live that same quiet story, believing they're keeping peace when really they're being erased. That's how the support group started. At first it was just Carol and me, sitting with tea at my kitchen table, sharing stories. Then she brought a friend. And that friend brought another. Soon there were 8 of us, all seniors, all with stories that sounded too familiar. Some had been manipulated into signing away property. Others were living with adult children who treated them like staff instead of parents. We met every Thursday evening right here in my living room. The air always smelled faintly of chamomile and lemon polish. We laughed sometimes, cried others, but mostly we talked. I showed them how to document things safely, how to set up small, inexpensive cameras or voice logs, not to cause trouble but to protect themselves. "I'm not teaching you to fight," I told them once. "I'm teaching you to stand still and let the truth do the talking." That became our little motto. Word spread quietly. A few younger folks started volunteering to help. A retired paralegal, a local reporter, even a young college student who offered to help set up tech. It became something bigger than I ever imagined. One evening, as the sun was setting and the room glowed in shades of gold and amber, I looked around at everyone, their faces soft in the fading light, their hands wrapped around warm mugs, and I realized I wasn't alone anymore. Not in the way I used to be. My life, which had once been so small and shadowed, had widened again. I didn't tell Mark or Tanya about any of it. I didn't need to. I heard through the grapevine that they'd moved to another city after selling the old house. We haven't spoken since the day I left, and I'm okay with that. Forgiveness doesn't always mean reconciliation. Sometimes it just means you stop letting the past take up space in your present. But there's one thing I do hope, that maybe one day my son will think back and understand what I was trying to teach him. Not through lectures or punishment, but through the quiet way I stood my ground. The last time I saw him was during the legal mediation. He looked tired, older somehow. I remember shaking his hand at the end and saying softly, "Take care of your family, Mark. That's all I ever wanted." He didn't say much, just nodded, eyes glistening. That was enough. These days my life is simple. I wake up early, feed the birds, and sit by the window with my coffee. Some mornings I write. Little reflections, thoughts about love, dignity, and the strange ways life circles back. Other mornings I just listen to the world breathe. The soft hum of traffic, the creak of trees, the faint whistle of a kettle on the stove. I don't need noise anymore. I've learned that peace doesn't come from silence. It comes from knowing you've done what's right, even if no one thanks you for it. One morning not long ago, I found myself talking to my husband again, just out loud to the air. I told him about the group, about the women and men who were learning to stand on their own feet again. I told him how proud he'd be, how I finally understood what he meant when he used to say, "Let the truth speak for itself." I smiled then, realizing that's exactly what I'd done. The sun poured through the kitchen window, painting everything in soft gold. I turned on the record player, his favorite one, and let the music fill the room. The melody drifted gently through the house, brushing against the curtains, the bookshelves, the walls that now held laughter again. I looked around my little cottage, this place of light and peace, and I thought, this is what strength looks like. Not revenge. not defiance. Just quiet steadiness. The kind that grows stronger each time life tries to bend you. Some people think silence is weakness, I said softly, my voice blending with the music. But silence can also be strength, when you're patient enough to let the truth speak for itself. I stood there for a while, just listening, to the record's soft hum, to the chirping outside, to the heartbeat of a life finally at ease. If you're hearing my story now, if it's found its way to you somehow, I hope you take this with you. Never confuse calm with surrender. Sometimes the most powerful voice you have is the one that waits, listens, and chooses the right moment to be heard. And if you've ever been made to feel small in your own home, remember, your worth doesn't shrink just because someone else forgets how to see it. This was my story, my quiet victory. If it touched you even a little, share it. Tell someone else who might need to hear it. Because strength doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers through stories like this one. And if you'd like to hear more, you're welcome to stay a while. There are more stories to tell. Until next time, take care of your peace. It's worth more than anything.